would you describe the present state of the planet? Socially, environmentally? How would you assess the way the world is going?
I think that everybody understands that there's something amiss underneath the kind of normal routines, and that normal is falling apart. People don't really know how bad it is. Like, they consciously maybe don't have a picture of just how bad it is. But I think everybody has a sense that there's something, that the world is falling apart almost. And that knowledge comes out in different ways. For some people, it might come out as, Jesus is coming, or the world is ending on, December 21st, 2012, or just maybe kind of this sense of foreboding. And I share that sense, but I see it more as a birth process. That all these crises are converging at the same time and propelling us toward a really, really different world, a different way of relating to each other, to nature, a different way of being. But like, from this side, like, it's bad, the crises are worse than most people really even know. And it would be completely hopeless if it weren't for the fact that our creative powers are also much greater than most people have any inkling of, including myself.
So how would you describe the forces at work in this world that have created this scenario?
Well, the way I see it, humanity's gone on this journey of separation, where we started out in a state of oneness with nature, a state of interconnectedness, a state of intimacy, harmony, and it wasn't like we made some big mistake or committed a sin or a fall, but we embarked on this journey of separation, of individuation, which has reached its peak, more or less in our time. And when anything reaches its peak, it gives birth to its opposite. So now we're just about turning the corner and entering into a really different age. You could call it an age of reunion, an age of interconnectedness, the ecological age, the age of inner being. And the transition is not easy, necessarily. But yeah, that's where we are. Yeah.
So how do you see? I mean, it's obvious to some people what's going on. I mean, I was talking to this climatologist that I was mentioning,
yeah,
and he's saying it's already too late. That we're going to lose
right.
40% of species. The poles are going to melt. It's already too late. But people who seem to be in charge don't seem to have that same understanding. What's your explanation, right, if you have one? I'm sure you've considered these things. What is it about human nature that seems to be so separated from their surroundings? Is the answer psychological, spiritual, physiological? Well,
people tend to believe what's convenient for them to believe, or more deeply than that, they believe things that are consistent with their state of being. Beliefs aren't these isolated intellectual constructs. They're not based on evidence either. We would like to think that our beliefs are based on evidence, unlike some people who are closed-minded and illogical and stupid, or self-serving, but we don't actually base our beliefs on evidence. We more likely kind of arrange the evidence to fit our beliefs. And so where do these beliefs come from? They're part of a state of being. They usually have emotional content. And this state of being is becoming less and less sustainable, or less and less bearable. But until it becomes impossible to maintain, until it becomes impossible to pretend that normal isn't coming back, then people will hold on to it and continue to believe what is convenient to believe, And that's changing now, but yeah.
It's right, because our personal lives seem to reflect our life as a species. And you were saying that crisis, I was reading your biography, that crisis was a major force in your life to shift your perception of the world. It seems like that's the way the world has to operate as well, that we're just
Right.
sort of a reflection of our personal selves, our outer selves, or maybe a reflection of our personal selves.
Yeah, what's true on an individual level is also true on a collective level. And often for really big changes to happen, things have to fall apart.
The philosophy of unlimited growth. Can you talk about that a bit? I know that you have a concept behind how that we got to this place.
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Yeah. So unlimited growth in terms of economics is starting to come into question today, where people are understanding that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. The thing that makes it hard to change is that our money system depends on endless growth and compels endless growth. You can't have an interest-bearing, debt-based money system that works without growth. When growth slows down, then concentration of wealth increases and the system falls apart. So you can kind of blame the money system for the endless growth, but it actually is deeper than that, because the money system doesn't exist in isolation from all of the other social agreements that create our civilization. And so I think that the crisis of money is kind of a symptom or part of a much larger crisis. And it's a crisis that is as deep as you could possibly go. It's a crisis in our defining mythology that says, that gives the answers to the questions, the big questions, like, who are you? What's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of humanity on Earth? Every culture has a different set of answers, and our answers are changing now. And as those answers change, everything else built on those is changing too, including the money system. And so part of our mythology has been, what is the human species? What is our purpose on Earth? What's our destiny? And it said that our origin was, helpless animals barely surviving, but then developing science and technology to become the lords and masters of nature. And so it's a myth, and it says someday our control will be complete. We won't even need nature anymore. We'll, synthesize food. We'll live in bubble cities, separate from nature, with robot servants, and we'll go up to the stars, and we'll conquer death itself. This mythology isn't working as well as it used to. In the 50s, you could very easily believe it, but not anymore. So endless growth, is part of this mythology of humanity's destiny to become the masters of the universe. So the wild realm shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. The unknown shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and it becomes ours instead. We domesticate the world, and we tame nature with science and technology and reveal all of nature's mysteries. And that's all a big myth, which isn't to say that it wasn't true in some sense for a while, but the truth is leaking out of that particular story. And we're stepping into a new story, a new defining myth. We're not there yet. And before we get there, we probably have to go through a time where we're in between stories, where we don't know what's true anymore, we don't know what's real. Nothing makes sense. And then at that time, we're back into embodied physical reality. But then at some point, we're going to be stepping into a new story. And you can see it emerging already. And it has something to do with being a partner in the evolution of something greater than ourselves, and being of service to nature, and finding out, what is our role on Gaia? No species is superfluous on this planet. Every gift of every species has a use, a contribution to make to the totality. And what's ours? We haven't been using it that way yet. So we're really a child species. We've been playing around, developing and discovering our gifts, but we haven't really stepped into maturity yet, where we devote our gift towards something beyond ourselves.
So where does real change take place? I mean, as an individual, we'll talk about. to change that perception. I mean, it seems like almost like the spiritual. There's even the word God seems to get a lot of flack. At least maybe not in certain parts of the states. Sounds like it's getting stronger. But generally, it seems like that's a dirty word. Like the spiritual aspect it's almost like the world's become more practical to the point where the concept
right.
of looking at the world from a spiritual angle is almost like it's.
Yeah. Spiritual has a bad reputation, and people who are really hands-on and devoted to changing the world, they'll kind of be really wary about anything spiritual, because I mean, come on, get off your meditation cushion and do something about it. But I think one thing that's happening is that what we've done as a culture is we've separated reality into two parts, and one of them is material and one of them is spiritual. And the spiritual is everything that we can't explain, and then as we explain more and more, that shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. But what we're understanding today is that a lot of the mystery that we kind of exported onto to this quote spiritual realm actually inheres in matter itself. So this kind of antipathy toward anything spiritual or anything about God, it's kind of well-founded, because we want to be practical. But what we're understanding now is that everything that we thought was practical isn't enough to solve the problems that we have today. Anything that we do that's limited by an old understanding of cause and effect, which is really based on Newtonian physics. It says that any change that happens in the world is because a force is exercised upon it. That's what Galileo discovered. That's what Newton mathematized. So if you want to change the world, you have to exert a force. But guess what? The powers that be have a lot more force than you do. And you're just one person. So therefore, you're helpless. And the only conclusion when you look at the world that way is despair. But that way of looking at the world is actually what our civilization is built on. You're this separate being in a universe of other. So you have to control as much as possible, insulate yourself from these external forces that have no rhyme or reason, that are indifferent to your well-being. It's as Rudolf Steiner put it, a war of all against all. That's the mindset that our whole civilization is built on. And if we're operating from that mindset as change agents, we're not going to really be able to create anything substantially new. But that worldview, it's part of the myth of our society that's falling apart. It's falling apart scientifically. The self-other distinction, even in physics, doesn't really make sense. In biology, it's no longer valid. It's no longer scientifically agreed upon that you are a flesh robot programmed by your DNA to maximize reproductive self-interest. Like all of these are falling apart. And from that new story, the story of the universe is part of me, I'm part of the universe, everything I do is significant. Whatever I do to the other, I'm doing to myself. However I change myself has an effect on everything else. Like from that vantage point, we're much more powerful, and it's no longer hopeless. And that vantage point, you could say, is what we've been calling spiritual. So it's not like we're engaging some extra material force, but it's that we're coming to a much bigger understanding of matter, a much bigger understanding of the laws of the universe, an expansion of the laws of physics. From that place, we're capable of a lot more. And we have to act from that place, because if you restrict yourself to what's practical, forget it. The problems are too big. The crises are too deep. Climate change. Like, what's practical? What's politically feasible? Maybe reducing the rate of increase in CO2 emissions. Like, that's something, that's politically feasible. But that's not what we need. If we do that, we're going to have, 9 degrees of warming in the next century. That's what the climatologists are saying behind closed doors. It's not 2 degrees, right? So we can't restrict ourselves to what's practical in those old terms. We have to really what we need is a miracle. miracle is something that's impossible from an old story, impossible from a new one. Impossible from an old set of beliefs, impossible from a new one. So we need to be operating in the new set of beliefs in this expanded world that includes those things that we called spiritual because we didn't have that big a paradigm to put them into. So I think that this division between spirit and matter and the people who don't want to have anything to do with anything spiritual, I think this is coming to an end as our conception of spirit and matter reunifies as well.
Another practical way that you promote change is this gift society. Do you mind just sort of explaining that? Versus a money sort of centric? So
it's not really gift versus money. There's two aspects to what I described when I'm talking about economics. And one of them is reclaiming some functions from the realm of money. Like there are some things that we pay for today that we really shouldn't be using money for most of the time. Like we should grow some of our own food. We should cook food for each other and not always be getting it at supermarket delis and takeouts and things like that. Children should play and create worlds of the imagination instead of buying those from software studios, right? There's a lot of functions that need to be returned, and we desire that. We want community. We want to meet each other and serve each other's needs. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is changing the nature of money itself so that it takes on some of the properties of gift. I can definitely say that the foundation of the work that I do in the money realm is gift. But that doesn't mean eliminating money. But it means creating a world based on, you could call it a gift cosmology, which is what ancient people had. I mean, they looked at the world as a circle of gifts and explained things in terms of the gift. Why is the sun shining? It's to give its warmth and light to the world. Why did the wolf bring down that deer? The deer gave itself to the wolf. Maybe not that individual deer, but the deer being part of its role is to feed the wolf. And what are you here for? Well, you're here as well to give, to contribute to something greater than yourself. And I think it's always true. It's always been true. It's true today. But our economic system kind of obscures that because so often what we really want to give to the world, there's no money in that. And the money is in something that doesn't really feel like a gift. It doesn't engage your gifts, or they're not going towards something beautiful to you. So we have a divorce between work and gift today, and that's enforced by money. So what I ask is, well, how could we change this system so that our heart's desire, the work that we really want to do, no longer has to fight against the power of money to do it? Because so many things today, like the big money isn't in things that are really making the earth a more beautiful place, generally speaking. I mean, there's some exceptions. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about creating a world based on gift.
And you're also, I saw a video of your on YouTube where you mentioned examples, whether it's these like the co-op cars and that kind of thing. Would you mind?
Right. There's a lot of really practical ways that we can bring the spirit of the gift into our economic lives. One of them would be collaborative consumption, where we share more, and like things like couch surfing, or like Craigslist. Just ways that we can. A lot of cities now have these cars, that you can. You're basically sharing them with everybody else. You don't have to buy your own car because we have so much stuff. It's really ridiculous for every single house to have its own Stairmaster, or its own set of power tools when you don't use them very often. So that's one way that we can consume less, still have just as high a quality of life, and have community too. Like there's no sacrifice here at all. And technology is allowing us to do that. But it's more than technology, it's also a change in our attitudes, where we no longer really want that insulated box of the nuclear family and that paradise of independence, which is actually a hell, you know.
Well, it seems like technology is actually promoting that even more, the separation with
Right.
each other and with the outside world. Like I know in my neighborhood, right, when I was growing up, there's always kids playing hockey in the street, right? Street hockey
Right.
is huge here, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, you never see kids. I never see kids on the streets.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like there's a strong force. Just keep on barreling ahead where it's going.
Yep.
So I know you kind of covered this, but what do you think it's going to take to get the masses to see this?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that always got to me too. Like, what happened to all the kids outside playing street hockey, playing football, you know, all these cops and robbers, you know. And what happened is they all are indoors playing something that's a product, you know. So technology is an agent for the conversion of life into money. And that process, like, I don't know how much longer it can continue, because there's almost nothing left that we pay for. But what it's going to take for it to stop, I think, is that the system is just going to have to stop working. And we're seeing that already. But also there's a voluntary aspect to it, that we've been there, you know, we've experienced this extreme of separation and we're sick of it. We want to reconnect. And at the same time as we're being pulled toward that, we're also being pushed away from the world of separation, because we've discovered that it's a world of loneliness, misery, illness, obesity, and that it entails the destruction of our ecosystems that feed back into our own lives and intensify the misery. So it's very much like a birth in that sense. But I think for most people, you know, to really change the way that they live, the old way that they live has to stop working. And it's happening now. Every time there's an economic crisis, a natural disaster, and these things are happening more and more and more, the old world is kind of falling apart.
So on a personal level, how do you mentioned despair, that a lot of this, just being a conscious being on this planet and actually being aware of what's going on, it's hard not to get very discouraged and feel despair. On a personal level, how do you deal with that?
Well, you know, intellectually, I understand that the despair comes from the same place as the problems do. It comes from the sense of self, of being a discrete, separate individual in a universe of other. Despair is built into that. So anything that removes me from that sense of self into a larger self, into an interconnected self, anything that does that remedies the despair. And so what does that? Well, I have a lot of help doing that. It's not something that I can do through an effort of will, but throughout my life, I've had many wonderful teachers, wonderful books, experiences that gave me an experience of oneness, of connection, that gave me an experience of not being this isolated self in a world of all against all. Experiences of generosity, you know, of being loved, of being forgiven, of these, you know, moments of connection with people, with nature. Like, all of these things are basically saying, Charles, you're not that little tiny self marooned in an indifferent universe. You are a part of everything. And so and it's not something that I can create for myself. You know, like, people would like to take credit for their spiritual advancement or something, but that's, you know, I'm sorry, that's not how it works. Our spiritual advancement, like everything else, is a gift, not something we can take credit for. And that means we're all in it together, because who do you rely on for this gift? Not yourself. But it also means that you can give that gift to other people. So anytime that you extend unexpected generosity or forgiveness or connection and give people the experience of being connected or being one, like, anytime you're doing that, you're helping to enlighten the world. And then, so you do that to somebody and they do it to somebody else, and eventually it comes back. So you could say that enlightenment is a group project, and we're all doing it together.
And it's funny the evidence that it's the evidence for how that works is obvious, like the disaster 911 or just the hurricane in New York City. How people all pull together. It's like it seems like that's our default. When something disaster happens, it's like you say, it just seems to be that we have to face the worst situation to get the best out of us.
Yeah, it's amazing. After these natural disasters, and everyone comes out of their houses, none of the structures that keep us separate are there anymore. Your bank card doesn't work. Like your money isn't going to help you. You can't just stay in your insulated box. So you get out there, people start taking care of each other, and then eventually the electricity comes back on. Everybody goes back to their old routines, and they look back years later and say, that was the best week of my life. So one way that you could envision the change happening is that sometime the electricity isn't going to come back on. Or maybe it will, but another crisis is going to follow on its heels, and again and again and again, and all these crises accelerating, they make it that there's no normal to come back to. Those old routines aren't there to pull us back away from those experiences. And as more and more people go through that and are living in that new place, which is of course very ancient as well, but living in that place of interconnectedness, then instead of being pulled back, this critical mass will pull everyone else forward. So that's what we're approaching I think in the next few years.
And you see that for soldiers or athletes, right? I mean, they never felt more alive or more love towards their fellow men, their comrades in those situations. It's a situation, but it's always a communal thing. So it seems like that is, like you say, it's our basic nature. We're a pack animal, right? Yeah,
it's our basic nature, and that nature it's usually obscured and suppressed because we have all of these institutions like money that suppresses our nature. But every time it has a chance, it wells up. It keeps coming back like dandelions through a parking lot. As soon as you stop maintaining that parking lot, then life is reborn.
To create change, is it an internal thing or is it an external thing? Ultimately,
I think that to create change, an external and an internal component is necessary. Like action is necessary on every level. So some people would say, well, to change the world, you have to change yourself first. But how do you change yourself? It's through your relationships. It's not that you can't just go and sit and meditate in a cave and change yourself. I mean, you can in some ways, but there are important ways of changing yourself, important aspects to our evolution that only happen in relationships. So this division between do I change the world or change myself, I think it's artificial. And it comes from the artificial distinction, the rigid distinction between self and world. That distinction, maybe it's useful sometimes, but ultimately it's not the ultimate reality. So work on self, work on world, they feed into each other, they interrelate.
So you also mentioned about greed. I saw somebody talking about greed. Mm-hmm. That greed is just one layer of the onion. That's kind of like a surface reflection of something that was much deeper. Do you recall what you mentioned about greed?
Well, I have a lot to say about greed.
Can you? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people think that, when you ask someone what's the problem in the world, why is everything going amok? They'll say, well, it's greed. There's really greedy people out there. Look at the horrible things that they're doing. And in order to have a better world, we have to stop those greedy people somehow. And then, of course, there's a recognition that, I've got greed in myself too. So really what it comes down to is a mindset of conquering evil. Well, our civilization is built on the mindset of conquering evil. It goes back to agriculture, where goodness, vitality, abundance came through controlling external forces, the floods, the wolves, the locusts. And the ideology has been that once our control of these evil forces, right? I mean, if they're harming your well-being, that's evil, right? Our control of these, when it becomes complete, we'll live in paradise. So this is a mindset of war and conquest and domination, and I think it's becoming obsolete. So when we export, like we're all, it hurts to be alive today in this world. We receive multiple wounds at the hands of our culture, of schooling, of the way parenting is done. I mean, you know, and one thing that we do with this is we kind of offload the pain, the outrage, the feeling of injustice, you know, onto this construct that we call greed. And so it's a kind of an othering, and it is a perpetuation of the state of war. And ultimately, it won't lead anywhere else but to more of the same. But really, greed, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but what I'm saying is that it's a response to certain conditions. It's a response really to scarcity. And it's the natural province of the separate self. Because there's this vast universe out there, and the more that I can control, then the better off I am. And how much do I have to control in order to prevent every single bad thing that could possibly happen? There's no limit. So greed is kind of built into our concept of self. So it's a response to scarcity on many levels. If you live in abundance, in a gift culture, say, like, why would you be greedy? If there's plenty for everybody, then it would be quite insane to keep a lot for yourself, especially in a gift culture where the status and the security goes to the one who gives. You know, if I have more than I need, I give to you. And then when I'm in need, you'll take care of me. Or the person who witnessed my generosity will take care of me. So it's a very different kind of wealth. Wealth comes from how much you give in a gift culture. And given that our universe is fundamentally a gift circle, and so this gets back to gift cosmology, greed doesn't really make sense. And it begins to disappear as we take on more and more of our true being, you know, our connected interbeing. Then greed doesn't make sense, right? If I'm not really separate from you, then why would I take from you, you know, and give to myself? Like, it just is illogical. In the old world, we had spiritual teachings, you know, don't be greedy. And those conflicted with our implicit assumptions about what a self was. But as those assumptions break down, logic and spirituality, selfishness and spirituality no longer disagree. And from that perspective, we can look at spiritual teachings through a different lens. For example, the golden rule, right? In the world of separation, it's a rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. And that's going to be hard. I know you don't want to, because you're bad. You know, you're a selfish maximizer of self-interest. So you're going to have to overcome yourself and obey this rule. But in the new understanding of self, it's simply a statement of fact. It's not a rule, it's a reminder. It says, as you do unto others, so you are, in fact, doing unto yourself. So yeah, greed is artificial. It's a symptom. Greed is a symptom. A symptom.
Thank you very much.